My name is Maria Hatch. I'm 26 years old, a newly graduated nurse who has fought for every inch of the future I have. Yet as I sit here in this polished oak courtroom, the air heavy with disinfectant and stale coffee, none of that matters. Because across the aisle, my own Aunt Sophie is suing me for $50,000, the supposed cost of raising me after my mother died. I try to steady my breathing. My palms press flat against my skirt, but the rhythmic tapping of Sophie's manicured nails on the table drills into my head. She sits poised in her cream-colored suit, her chin slightly lifted, a picture of composure for the judge and anyone watching. Beside her, Uncle Jack stares down at his folded hands, as if they hold all the answers he's too cowardly to say aloud. My cousin Cassidy lounges 2 seats away, her glossy hair perfectly curled, a faint smirk tugging at her lips every time her eyes flick toward me. I want to scream to demand how they can twist reality so cruelly, but instead I sit frozen, the murmurs of lawyers and shuffling papers around me, blurring into a dull hum. A thick envelope lies in front of me, Sophie's so-called invoice, itemized expenses for my food, shelter, and clothing. Each line feels like a slap, every bite of bread, every secondhand t-shirt, every night under their roof transformed into a debt. How did I end up here? How did the girl who once believed family meant safety end up being treated like a delinquent client who overstayed her welcome? The judge hasn't even entered yet, but already my mind reels backward as if to protect me from the absurdity of this moment. My thoughts drift unbidden to a different courtroom years ago, not of law and order, but of memory. The walls of that room were painted warm yellow, cluttered with drawings and school certificates. In it, my mother's laughter echoed brighter than any gavel's strike. Back then, life was simple. I was 3 years old when my father passed away. I don't remember his face, only the shadow of his absence in my mother's eyes. But Mom Amanda made sure I never felt the void too deeply. She raised me alone in our tiny 2-bedroom apartment, filling it with warmth that no amount of money could buy. She worked long shifts as a nurse at Memorial Hospital, returning each night with stories of saving lives, of small victories, in patients' darkest hours. I used to sit cross-legged on the sofa, wide-eyed, as she spoke about her patients. "You see, Maria," she would say, loosening her shoelaces with weary fingers. "Sometimes hope looks like medicine, and sometimes it looks like holding someone's hand until the storm passes." Those words planted a seed inside me, a dream of becoming a nurse myself one day. Weekends were sacred. Saturday mornings meant baking cookies, the scent of vanilla and chocolate chips spilling into every corner of our apartment. I would sneak tastes of raw dough, giggling, while Mom pretended to scold me. Sundays we'd head to the park feeding ducks at the pond or combing through library shelves for new adventures. Our little home was decorated with my drawings and school certificates, each one displayed like priceless artifacts. On my 10th birthday, Mom surprised me with a children's medical kit, a plastic stethoscope thermometer, and toy syringes. I remember placing the stethoscope against her chest, hearing the steady beat of her heart. "You'll wear a real one someday," she whispered, her eyes shining with pride. I believed her with the blind certainty of a child. Life wasn't perfect. We never had the newest toys or designer clothes, but Mom taught me that gratitude made any life rich. Whenever I sulked over what we didn't have, she would kneel, tuck my hair behind my ear, and say, "Maria, the world can strip you of many things, but not your education, not your kindness, and not your strength. Remember that." I didn't know then how much I would cling to those words. The clatter of the courtroom door jolts me back to the present. The bailiff announces the judge's arrival. Everyone rises, a sea of rustling fabric and shuffling feet. My knees tremble as I stand, but I lock my gaze on the polished wood of the bench ahead rather than Sophie's calculated posture beside me. Judge Harriet Woodson enters, her sharp eyes scanning the room like she can already sense the undercurrents beneath our tidy appearances. For a fleeting second, panic seizes me. What if she believes Sophie? What if this courtroom becomes another place where I'm painted as a burden, just as Sophie has always insisted? I swallow hard, clutching my mother's small pearl earrings dangling from my lobes. I wore them today as a shield, a reminder that her love is still with me, even here. "Hatch versus Hatch," the bailiff intones. The irony of hearing my last name attached to both plaintiff and defendant twists in my chest. The judge's gavel strikes once. Let's proceed. As Sophie's lawyer rises, his voice smooth and rehearsed, I let my mind drift again, not in escape this time, but in defiance. If Sophie wants to drag me through the mud of the past, then so be it. But I will remember it truthfully, not through her distorted ledger of debts and credits. The story isn't hers to tell, it's mine. And it begins not with lawsuits and invoices, but with a summer when my mother's laughter turned into a cough that never went away. Before everything shattered, my world was painted in warm, ordinary colors. Small, simple joys stitched my childhood together, each moment glowing brighter in memory because I didn't yet know how fragile it all was. Mom worked hard, sometimes double shifts, but she never let me feel poor or deprived. Our two-bedroom apartment wasn't much peeling wallpaper in the kitchen, a squeaky faucet in the bathroom carpets worn thin by time. But to me, it was paradise, because it was filled with my mother's laughter. She would come home after 12-hour hospital shifts, her scrubs wrinkled and smelling faintly of antiseptic, and collapse onto our sagging sofa. I'd curl up beside her with my head on her shoulder, waiting for her stories, and she always had one about the old man who held her hand through his pain, or the child who smiled after a scary treatment. "Hope is contagious, Maria," she would say. "Sometimes it's the only medicine we have left." Her words sank into me, shaping my dreams more than I realized at the time. Weekends were different. Saturdays smelled of vanilla and sugar. We would bake cookies together, me spilling flour across the counter while Mom pretended to be horrified. "You're lucky you're cute," she teased, flicking a dab of dough at my nose. Sundays meant the park. I'd chase ducks at the pond, convinced they quacked back when I quacked first. Sometimes we'd end the day at the library where she let me borrow as many books as my arms could carry. Our walls were a gallery of pride. Crayon drawings taped above the TV, spelling tests, pinned on the fridge with fruit-shaped magnets, homemade birthday cards lined along the mantel. I didn't know then that other kids' parents didn't keep everything. To me, it felt normal that each A+ became a miniature holiday, Mom dancing me around the kitchen until we were both breathless with laughter. One winter afternoon, I brought home a certificate for winning the school science fair. I had built a model volcano that erupted baking soda and vinegar lava. It wasn't perfect, but to me, it was magic. Mom taped it on the refrigerator like it was a Nobel Prize. "Someday you'll do this for real," she said softly, brushing my hair behind my ear. "Not volcanoes, but medicine. Something that matters. I see it in you." She gave me the children's medical kit for my 10th birthday. The stethoscope was plastic. The thermometer a cheap red strip, but I carried it everywhere. I even used it at the grocery store, pretending to check the heartbeat of watermelons. Neighbors laughed, but Mom just smiled proudly. "You'll wear a real one someday," she whispered, her voice full of certainty. That promise became the heartbeat of my future. Yet even in that warm cocoon, shadows crept in. I didn't see it then, but now I know. We weren't rich. I envied classmates with shiny shoes, backpacks with cartoon characters, the latest toys. At 12, all I wanted was a pair of sneakers, like the popular girls wore pink with glittery laces. Mom came home late one evening, her face tired but determined. She handed me a plain box. Inside was a pair of sneakers, not the expensive brand, but new with bright white soles. "They'll get you where you're going," she said. I hugged her so tightly she nearly lost her balance. Later, I overheard her murmuring to herself at the kitchen table, calculator in hand, bills spread like battleground maps. I didn't understand the numbers, only the worry in her eyes. But she noticed me in the doorway, smiled quickly, and said, "Everything's fine. Don't you worry." That was Mom shielding me from storms, even when the clouds were already darkening. Then came the cough. At first, it was soft, brushed off as nothing. Allergies, she claimed. But it grew harsher, deeper, tearing through her chest at night until I lay awake listening, helpless. She lost weight, her uniform hanging loose. She started wincing when she thought I wasn't looking, clutching her side as though invisible knives dug into her ribs. One evening, I caught her swallowing painkillers at the sink long after she thought I was asleep. I remember the way she froze, bottle in hand, when she saw me standing there. "Go to bed, sweetheart," she whispered. But her eyes said more fear she couldn't hide. The day she finally went to the doctor, I stayed with Mrs. Thomas, our elderly neighbor. I tried to do my science project at her kitchen table, but my pencil wouldn't stop tapping against the paper. My mind chased every possibility, none of them good. When Mom returned, I knew, before she said a word. Her face was pale, her lips trembling. She sank into a chair like gravity had doubled. "Stage 4, she said softly, as though saying it quietly would make it less true. "Lung cancer. Terminal. 6 months, maybe a year." The words dropped into our small kitchen like stones smashing everything solid. I remember clinging to her hand, my tears soaking her scrubs. She tried to smile, even then, smoothing my hair back. We'll be okay. We'll make every day count. But something inside me knew our world had shifted forever. After that, life became a blur of responsibilities that were far too big for a 12-year-old. I started cooking dinners, folding laundry, cleaning the apartment. I kept a notebook of her medication schedules, setting alarms so I wouldn't forget. I walked to the pharmacy, clutching prescriptions like sacred scrolls. School slipped to the background. Friends stopped calling. When they invited me to the movies or the mall, I said no too many times for them to keep asking. My world shrank to the size of our apartment, to the fragile rise and fall of Mom's chest as she slept. Hospice nurses began visiting daily. They spoke in low, careful voices, like we were already halfway to morning. I hated them for treating her like she was gone before she truly was. But I listened, I learned, because every tip meant one more day I could make her comfortable. Sometimes when she was lucid, she'd squeeze my hand and whisper, "You're so strong, Maria. Promise me. Promise me you'll keep going. Keep shining after I'm gone." I nodded, tears streaming, though I didn't understand how I could shine without her. Looking back, I realized those days prepared me for everything that came later. For Sophie, for the betrayals, for the courtroom. But at the time, I was just a child carrying a weight that bent my spine, praying that love alone would be enough to hold the world together. And then, on a quiet Tuesday morning, just 3 weeks after my 13th birthday, it wasn't enough. The morning my world ended was deceptively ordinary. The sun crept through our thin curtains, throwing golden stripes across the bedspread. Outside, a neighbor's radio played faintly muffled laughter from kids floated up the stairwell. And yet inside our small apartment, time had slowed to the beat of a weakening heart. Mom lay propped against pillows, her skin ashen, her breath shallow and uneven. I sat cross-legged beside her, the notebook with her medication schedule open on my lap, though my pen had stopped moving. Her hand was fragile in mine, weightless, as if I was holding only memory. The hospice nurse had already come and gone that morning, checking vitals, murmuring words I barely processed. "It won't be long now," she'd whispered at the door, her eyes pitying. I had wanted to scream at her for saying it out loud, for breaking the fragile illusion I clung to. Mom's eyes fluttered open, and for a moment the familiar spark was still there. "Maria." She whispered, her voice frayed like worn cloth. I leaned closer. "I love you. Always remember who you are. Promise me you'll keep shining." I nodded fiercely, though my tears blurred everything. I wanted to say 1,000 things that I wasn't ready, that she couldn't leave me, that I still needed her, but my voice collapsed into silence. A few hours later, on that quiet Tuesday morning, she exhaled and never inhaled again. The world tilted. The room spun. I sat frozen, gripping her cooling hand, waiting for her chest to rise again. When it didn't, I stayed there unmoving until the hospice nurse returned and gently pried me away. I was 13 years old, and I had just become motherless. The funeral was a blur of black coats, perfume, and murmured condolences. Strangers pressed tissues into my hands. People I barely knew whispered that my mother was in a better place. I wanted to shout that there was no better place than beside me, that their platitudes were insults, not comfort. I stood in the front row, numb, watching, as the coffin was lowered, my reflection faint on the polished wood. It felt obscene that the world kept turning. Cars still drove past, birds still sang. Didn't they know my universe had just collapsed? That's when Aunt Sophie appeared. She swept in like she owned the grief, her designer heels clicking on the church steps, her perfume sharp and expensive. I had seen her only rarely before Christmas dinners, where she arrived late with glossy shopping bags for Cassidy, my cousin, and a half-hearted hug for me. Now Sophie leaned down, pressing her hand on my shoulder for all to see. "Don't worry, sweetheart," she said loudly, her voice dripping with concern. "I'll take care of you now. You'll come live with us." Her eyes flicked around, making sure others heard her. I remember blinking up at her, stunned. Her smile was practiced, rehearsed, but her eyes held something colder, a calculation I didn't yet understand. Beside her stood Uncle Jack, stiff in his suit, nodding politely to mourners. Cassidy, 15 and flawless in her sleek black dress, gave me a smile that didn't touch her eyes. The social worker assigned to my case arrived soon after meeting with Sophie and my grandmother. My grandmother was frail, living in a senior community, unable to take me in. The decision felt like it was made before I even had a chance to breathe. I would go live with Sophie. Sophie put on a show of concern. "Of course we'll take her. She's family. We'll make sure she has everything she needs. She even dabbed her eyes with a tissue, though I didn't see a single tear fall. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe someone could fill the gaping hole Mom left behind. Packing up the apartment was like dismantling my soul. I folded my life into boxes, clothes, drawings, the medical kit from my 10th birthday, every object suddenly sacred because it had touched her hands. In the corner of my bookshelf, I found a letter tucked inside my favorite novel. My breath caught as I recognized Mom's handwriting. Hands shaking, I unfolded it. Remember who you are, Maria. Life will throw storms your way, but you have the strength to weather them all. I'll love you always, even when you can't see me anymore. Tears blurred the ink, but I pressed the paper to my chest. It was the last gift she left me, a lifeline I would return to again and again. When the moving truck pulled away, I stood at the apartment door for a final glance. The rooms were empty now, echoes of laughter replaced by silence. It felt like betrayal to leave, like I was abandoning her. But the letter in my pocket reminded me she wanted me to survive. The drive to Sophie's house was 3 hours long, every mile, stretching the distance between my past and an uncertain future. Sophie's luxury SUV smelled of leather and perfume. She made occasional comments about how different my life would be now, how much better her neighborhood was, how I'd have opportunities. I stared out the window, watching my hometown dissolve in the side mirror. Each familiar landmark disappeared: the park, where we fed ducks, the bakery, where Mrs. Garcia slipped me cookies, the library, where Mom and I borrowed stacks of books. It felt like pieces of me were vanishing one by one. When we finally pulled into Sophie's driveway, I stared up at her 2-story colonial house with its pristine white columns and manicured lawn. It was beautiful, intimidating, and cold. Cassidy was waiting on the porch. Her smile practiced her arms crossed. Uncle Jack stepped out of his office briefly, offering a distracted welcome before retreating back inside. "This will be your room," Sophie announced, opening the door to a small, stark bedroom at the far end of the hallway. The furniture was plain secondhand, the walls bare. It looked nothing like Cassidy's room, which I glimpsed in passing pink walls. Fairy lights, custom furniture, a queen-size bed. "We can add some color later," Sophie said vaguely, as if she had already forgotten the promise. That first night, Sophie served a special dinner: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, a bottle of wine for the adults. The conversation was polite, rehearsed. Uncle Jack asked about my hobbies. Sophie even shared a memory of Mom from their childhood, her tone almost gentle. For a fleeting moment, I let myself hope. Maybe this could work. Maybe family meant something after all. But as I lay in the strange bed that night, the letter from Mom under my pillow, I couldn't shake the unease. Sophie's smile had been too polished, Cassidy's welcome too thin, Jack's indifference too deep. And beneath it all, a whisper in my gut told me the storm Mom warned me about had only just begun. At first glance, Sophie's home looked like something from the glossy magazines stacked on coffee tables at the dentist's office. The colonial columns gleamed white, the hedges trimmed into perfect symmetry, the driveway smooth enough to eat dinner off. Everything about it screamed order, wealth, and appearances. But appearances deceive. The moment I stepped inside, the air shifted. The house smelled faintly of polished wood and lavender spray, but beneath that was something sharper, tension maybe, or the weight of rules I hadn't yet been told. Cassidy led me upstairs with the grace of someone already used to being admired. She tossed her hair and pushed open the door to her room just to show me. It looked like a magazine spread soft pink walls matching furniture, fairy lights strung like stardust across the ceiling. A vanity mirror twinkled with bulbs, bottles of perfume lined up like soldiers. "Cute, right?" she asked, her smile tight. I nodded, though something in her tone told me the question wasn't really a question. Then Sophie ushered me down the hall to the last door far from the others. "This will be your room." The space was stark. White walls, a faded blue bedspread, second-hand dresser. No posters, no warmth. Even the carpet felt rough under my shoes, like it had been pulled from storage. "We can add some color later," maybe Sophie said, her voice already fading as she turned away. That first night I lay on the unfamiliar bed staring at the ceiling. From down the hall, I heard Cassidy's laughter music, muffled but lively. My room was silent, the kind of silence that presses against your chest until you can barely breathe. I slipped Mom's letter from beneath my pillow, rereading the words by flashlight. "Remember who you are. Life will throw storms your way." The storm began sooner than I expected. By the end of the first week, Sophie handed me a typed sheet of paper titled, house rules. It listed everything from bathroom times to curfews with sections highlighted in yellow. In this house, everyone contributes, she said, as if she were being generous. Curfew, 8 p.m. on weekdays, 9 p.m. on weekends. Designated bathroom slots, 10 minutes each staggered, so Cassidy and I wouldn't overlap. Study hours mandatory at the kitchen table where Sophie could supervise. Chores a list that grew longer each day. Dishes, laundry, vacuuming, bathrooms. I noticed Cassidy's name wasn't on the list at all. When I asked timidly, "What about Cassidy?" Sophie's smile hardened. "Cassidy has her own responsibilities. Don't compare yourself to her. You should be grateful we're giving you structure." So I scrubbed while Cassidy lounged by the pool. I folded towels while she texted friends. I vacuumed while she sprawled on her bed, painting her nails, her door wide open so I could see what I wasn't allowed to be. The first sign that Sophie's kindness was more performance than truth came when she sorted through my moving boxes before I had the chance to unpack. She plucked out clothes she deemed too worn, setting them in a pile. "These won't do. We have standards in this neighborhood. You represent our family now." I stared at the small pile clothes Mom had saved up to buy my favorite hoodie with the fading logo t-shirts that still smelled faintly of her laundry detergent. Sophie looked at my expression and said almost gently, "It's for your own good, Maria. You'll thank me someday." But I didn't thank her. I folded those clothes carefully when she wasn't looking and hid them at the back of my dresser. School was another adjustment. My transcripts transferred, but the system placed me in standard classes despite the advanced ones I had been excelling in. When I mentioned it to Sophie, she waved a dismissive hand. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves. You've been through a trauma. Best to take it easy." The words stung. Mom had always told me education was untouchable, the key to my future. Sophie treated it like an inconvenience. The first time I truly understood my place in that household came during school shopping. Cassidy picked out a designer backpack, a brand new laptop, top-of-the-line supplies. I was given a plastic binder, spiral notebooks from the dollar store, and pens that barely wrote. "We have to be mindful of expenses," Sophie said when she saw my expression. "Your mother didn't leave much for your care." That night, lying in bed, I heard them through the thin walls. Sophie's voice, sharp. "Uncle Jack's tired. The Social Security checks barely cover the extra expenses. Do you know how much teenagers eat? How much their activities cost?" "She's family," Sophie, Jack murmured. "Family that's costing us." Amanda was always irresponsible, not planning better for her daughter. I pressed the pillow over my head to muffle their voices, tears soaking the fabric. Sophie had said it in front of Jack so casually. I wasn't a niece. I was a bill. I tried to find small ways to keep myself grounded. At night, I would quietly tape one of my old drawings to the wall above my bed, even though Sophie rolled her eyes when she saw. I kept Mom's letter tucked under my pillow, reading it when the loneliness became too sharp. But each day chipped at me. Cassidy's casual cruelty, mocking my clothes, spreading whispers at school was one blade. Sophie's endless reminders of my burden were another. And Jack's silence, his refusal to step in, cut deepest of all. One evening after dinner, Sophie announced Cassidy needs a new phone. Her grades are excellent, she deserves it. She turned to me. "Now, Maria, if you want something nice, you'll have to work for it. Nothing comes for free in this world." Her words hung in the air like smoke. Cassidy smirked across the table. Jack said nothing. That night, I clutched Mom's letter tighter than ever. Life will throw storms your way. The storm was here, and I was already drowning. Weeks turned into months. My chores multiplied, my freedom shrank, and the distance between Sophie's public persona and private cruelty widened. At church on Sundays, Sophie introduced me to neighbors as her brave niece, praising herself for taking me in. "It's been such a sacrifice," she'd say with a sigh, her hand resting on my shoulder like I was a prop. Everyone nodded sympathetically, praising her generosity. But at home, she muttered about grocery bills. If I took an extra helping, reminded me of orthodontic costs I'd never see, and withheld even basic kindness. I began spending longer hours at the school library volunteering for clubs, anything to stay away from the house. Teachers noticed my focus, my hunger to succeed. It became my escape. If I couldn't be loved, maybe I could at least be excellent. Still, the whispers of Sophie's manipulation reached me in quiet moments. The way she locked her purse when I walked into a room, the sharpness in her tone when she mentioned expenses, the fact that Cassidy's privileges only grew while mine shrank. And beneath it all, I couldn't ignore the creeping suspicion that Sophie's complaints about money weren't the full truth. One evening, while cleaning the kitchen, I accidentally knocked over Sophie's purse. Among the scattered contents, I glimpsed an envelope from the Social Security Administration. My pulse raced. I didn't read it fully, then only saw my name printed in bold and words about survivor benefits. That night, lying awake, I realized something unsettling. Sophie's story about scraping by might not be a story at all, it might be a lie. And if that was true, then her kindness, her sacrifice, and even her role as my guardian were built on deceit. The storm wasn't just here. It was tightening, swirling around me, and I had no idea how violent it would become. By the time I had been in Sophie's house for a year, the rules weren't just rules anymore. They had become chains, invisible, but heavy clinking, with every step I took. Each day began with chores before school. Scrubbing bathroom tiles, loading laundry, wiping countertops until they gleamed. Sophie would inspect my work with a sharp eye, her manicured finger gliding along surfaces, waiting for a speck of dust to scold me over. You should be grateful, she'd remind me when I faltered. All this discipline will build character. One day you'll thank me. But gratitude doesn't grow where love is missing. Cassidy thrived in her kingdom of indulgence. For her 16th birthday, Sophie and Jack surprised her with a car, a shiny red convertible that gleamed in the driveway like a trophy. I stood on the porch holding the cake Sophie had made, trying to smile as Cassidy squealed and leapt into Sophie's arms. You'll get one too if you work hard enough, Sophie said to me later, as if a second-hand bicycle was comparable. You could always get a job. Save up. So I did. By sophomore year, I worked part-time at Sweet Blossom's Bakery after school. Mrs. Garcia, the owner, became a rare light in my life. She paid me, fairly slipped me extra pastries when she thought I looked hungry, and sometimes drove me home when shifts ran late. When I proudly brought home my first paycheck, Sophie was waiting in the kitchen. She held out her hand like a banker collecting a debt. Now that you're earning, you should contribute to household expenses. $300 a month seems fair for room and board. It was nearly half of what I made. My throat tightened, but I handed it over. I had already learned that arguing with Sophie only made things worse. Later, I overheard her telling Jack, she needs to learn financial responsibility. We're teaching her how the real world works. Jack just grunted, retreating behind his newspaper. School should have been my escape, but Cassidy made sure it wasn't. She told classmates I was her charity case cousin. Sometimes she leaned in close, lowering her voice so only I could hear. Everyone knows you're just here because my mom felt sorry for you. When boys showed interest in me, she would whisper poisonous words about my unstable family background, painting me as broken before I had a chance to defend myself. At night, I cried quietly into my pillow, Mom's letter clenched in my hand. But instead of breaking me, Cassidy's cruelty hardened my resolve. If I couldn't win at family, I would win at school. I pushed for honors classes, fought to prove myself. My teachers noticed. Mrs. Jackson, my AP biology teacher, became my lifeline. She saw through the polite smiles I wore like armor and asked careful questions. Are you eating enough? How are things at home? I lied at first, but her steady presence cracked my silence little by little. The real turning point came one rainy Tuesday during junior year. I stayed late for a chemistry lab, and by the time I left, the last bus was gone. As I trudged down the soaked sidewalk, a car slowed beside me. The window rolled down. Mrs. Jackson leaned over. Maria, get in before you drown. During the drive, she asked about my future. Nursing, I told her without hesitation. Her smile warmed me in a way Sophie's never had. You remind me of myself at your age. Determined, focused, despite obstacles. Her words cracked something inside me, a reminder that I wasn't invisible. 2 weeks later, when Sophie confiscated half my paycheck for utilities I used excessively, I finally confided in Mrs. Jackson. The words spilled out faster than I could control Sophie's constant complaints, the way she treated me like a bill instead of a niece, and the letter I had glimpsed months ago from the Social Security Administration. Mrs. Jackson's expression hardened as she listened. Have you considered that your aunt may be misusing funds meant for your care? The thought had been gnawing at me for months, but hearing it aloud made it real. What can I do? I'm a minor. She's my guardian. Her voice was steady. Start documenting, keep records, and let's explore scholarship options. You need a way out. Her advice became my secret mission. One evening, not long after I was searching Jack's office for a stapler, when I stumbled on a folder labeled with my name, my pulse hammered. Inside were years of Social Security statements. Each month, Sophie had received over $1,000 money intended for my food, clothing, and care. I snapped photos with trembling hands and carefully replaced the papers. That night, I emailed them to myself and to Mrs. Jackson, ensuring there was a record Sophie couldn't erase. The revelation burned in my chest. For years, Sophie had complained about expenses denied me. Orthodontic care, scoffed at college brochures because applications are expensive. All the while, she had been pocketing funds meant for me. Her sacrifices weren't sacrifices at all, they were lies. From then on, survival became strategy. I kept my head down, handing over rent money without protest, doing chores without complaint. But inside, I built an armor of determination. I joined every club that might strengthen my college applications. I volunteered at the local hospital on Sundays, quietly collecting experiences Sophie couldn't steal. Each night, when I lay awake listening to the muffled laughter from Cassidy's room, I told myself, this isn't forever. And slowly the light at the end of the tunnel grew brighter. Mrs. Jackson helped me research nursing scholarships, editing my essays during lunch. Mrs. Garcia let me adjust shifts around exams. My grades soared. I became the student who always raised her hand, who stayed after class to help, who teachers quietly whispered had so much potential. But Sophie noticed too. Another club she sneered one evening, folding her arms as I tried to explain the health sciences group. Do you think you're special? You're not. Remember, we're the ones keeping a roof over your head. Her words hit like stones, but I swallowed them whole. Arguing would only give her power. Instead, I held on to Mom's letter, Mrs. Jackson's encouragement, and the secret evidence tucked safely in my email. Because for the first time I realized something Sophie didn't know. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was preparing. By senior year, I had perfected the art of invisibility. At Sophie's house, I kept my head down, did the chores handed over the rent, and avoided drawing Cassidy's attention. But at school, I refused to vanish. There, I poured every ounce of myself into grades clubs and volunteer work. If I couldn't win Sophie's approval, I would win my own freedom. Mrs. Jackson became my compass. During lunch breaks in her classroom, she helped me research scholarships, marking my essays with red pen until my words gleamed with conviction. Don't sell yourself short, Maria, she'd remind me. You've done more with less than most people could imagine. That matters. On Sundays, I volunteered at Memorial Hospital, shadowing nurses, fetching supplies, talking with patients. Every time a frightened child squeezed my hand, I remembered Mom's words, hope is contagious. I began to feel that maybe I was catching some of it myself. But hope was fragile in Sophie's house. One evening, I came home from my hospital shift to find Sophie waiting in the kitchen, arms crossed. Another late night, she asked, her tone dripping with accusation. I was volunteering, I explained, careful not to sound defensive. Volunteering, she repeated, as if the word itself was foolish. Do you think that's free gas, utilities, food? Everything costs money. You should be focusing on something useful, like getting a job that pays better. Her voice was sharp, but beneath it, I sensed something else unease. Maybe she saw the cracks forming in her control. Maybe she knew my eyes were set on horizons she couldn't reach. Later that night, I overheard her telling Jack, she's getting ideas. These scholarships, these clubs, we need to remind her where she belongs. Jack's weary reply, she'll be gone soon enough. Let her dream. But Sophie never let anything go easily. Cassidy, meanwhile, perfected her role as tormentor. She spread stories about me at school that I was unstable, that my mother had left debts, that I was only passing because teachers pitied me. Some classmates believed her, some didn't, but the damage was done. Whispers followed me down hallways like shadows. Once after I gave a presentation in biology class, Cassidy muttered loud enough for everyone to hear, "Of course the orphan gets special treatment." Laughter rippled around her. My hands shook, but I forced myself to keep my gaze steady. If I broke, she would win. Instead, I doubled down. Late nights at the library, early mornings at the bakery, weekends at the hospital. Exhaustion clung to me, but so did determination. And then one crisp April afternoon it arrived. The envelope. Thick, heavy, embossed with the crest of State University. I ripped it open in the school bathroom, my hands trembling. Congratulations, the letter began. I had earned a full-ride scholarship to study nursing, tuition, housing, meals, even a stipend for books. I pressed my hand over my mouth to keep from screaming. Tears blurred the words, but the meaning was clear freedom. For the first time since Mom died, I felt like the future belonged to me. I couldn't let Sophie find out, not yet. So I folded the letter carefully, slid it into my backpack, and hid it under my mattress that night. When graduation came, I wore the cap and gown Sophie complained about paying for. "What a waste of money," she muttered, rolling her eyes. "Do you think nursing is glamorous? You'll burn out in a year." Cassidy, home from her first year at an expensive private college fully funded by Sophie and Jack, smirked as if my achievements were a joke. But in the crowd that day, two people stood cheering louder than anyone: Mrs. Jackson and Mrs. Garcia from the bakery. They clapped and hollered as though I were their own daughter. Their pride wrapped around me like armor. After the ceremony, Mrs. Jackson handed me a gift bag. Inside was a professional stethoscope gleaming silver and black. The note attached read, "Your mother would be so proud. I know I am." I cried harder than I had in years. Moving into my dorm at State University felt like stepping into another universe. The room was small, the walls cinder-block the furniture utilitarian, but to me, it was paradise. It was mine. My roommate Jasmine arrived with her parents, who helped her unpack boxes, string fairy lights, and set up photos of family vacations. They offered to help me too, but all I had was 2 suitcases and a backpack. Sophie had driven me to campus but didn't even park. She stopped at the entrance, popped the trunk, and said, "Text when you're settled." Her car was already rolling forward before I pulled my bags onto the sidewalk. Remember, she called out scholarship or not. Holidays aren't covered. If you plan to stay with us, you'll need to contribute. $300 a week seems fair. Her words echoed in my ears long after her SUV disappeared. Jasmine, sensing my silence, smiled gently. "Don't worry, my mom always sends too much in care packages. I'll share." And she did. Cookies, toiletries, handwritten notes from her parents. Each time I felt a pang of longing, but also gratitude. Jasmine's kindness reminded me that family could be chosen, not assigned. University life was demanding. Early clinicals, late-night study sessions, exams that felt like mountains. But I thrived. Every challenge reminded me of Mom, of the strength she'd passed down to me. To cover expenses, I worked shifts at the campus coffee shop and weekends at an assisted living facility. Balancing everything was exhausting, but I refused to complain. Freedom was worth every drop of sweat. Still, Sophie's shadow stretched long. Before Thanksgiving, she called. "Since you're not contributing financially anymore, we'll need compensation if you stay with us over the holiday. $300 for the week should do." I bit my lip, calculating how many extra shifts that would require. Jasmine overheard, waited until I hung up, then said, "Come home with me. My parents would love to have you." That Thanksgiving became the first of many spent with the Parkers. They welcomed me as though I'd always been there, including me in family photos, teaching me traditions, passing me food with warmth instead of resentment. Mrs. Parker, a physical therapist, told me stories of her career, listening intently when I shared my nursing dreams. Mr. Parker taught me his cranberry sauce recipe, handing me the wooden spoon with patient instructions. When Sophie called on Christmas demanding room and board payment, I told her I had made other arrangements. The stunned pause on the other end of the line was almost satisfying. Almost. Despite the distance, Sophie still managed to intrude. Her calls came less often, but when they did, they dripped with passive-aggressive reminders how much she had sacrificed, how ungrateful I was, how easily she could have let me rot in foster care. But by then her words had lost their power. I had tasted freedom. I had people who saw me not as a burden, but as a person worth investing in. For the first time since I was 13, I believed Mom's words again. Life will throw storms your way, but you have the strength to weather them all. And though Sophie's storm still brewed on the horizon, I had finally found shelter. Life at State University was everything Sophie had told me it wouldn't be: full, demanding, and alive with possibility. For the first time, my days belonged to me. I woke up not to Sophie's chore list taped to the fridge, but to the alarm on my phone reminding me of early clinical rotations. I worked long hours at the coffee shop, crammed for exams in the library, and dragged myself home from the hospital with aching feet, and I loved every exhausting second of it. Jasmine became more than a roommate. She was family. Her parents checked in on me too, sending care packages addressed to both of us. "You're practically another daughter," Mrs. Parker said once, hugging me after Thanksgiving dinner. I hadn't realized how much I needed to hear those words until tears stung my eyes. For holidays, I stopped even pretending to consider Sophie's room and board offers. Each time she called, her voice clipped and cold, I politely declined. I knew what she really missed wasn't me, it was the cash. In my second year, I met David. It was at the campus career fair in the crowded gym, filled with booths, flyers, and hopeful chatter. He was standing at the healthcare table, a tall medical student with kind eyes and a shy smile. We struck up a conversation about pediatric care. He listened closely, asking about my interest in nursing, nodding thoughtfully at my answers. There was no judgment in his gaze, no curiosity about my sob story, just respect. We started meeting for coffee between classes. Slowly, those conversations deepened from medical ethics to family pressure. One evening, after I finally told him the truth about Sophie, he grew quiet. Then he said softly, "Maria, you know what she did might be illegal, right?" The words hit me like a tremor under the floorboards. I had thought it before, but hearing it from someone else gave it weight. "Illegal," I repeated. "Survivor benefits are supposed to be for you," he explained. "Not her. If she spent them on herself." He trailed off, his expression tightening. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Sophie's voice still echoed in my memory. Every complaint about grocery bills, every lecture about my cost. But now those words rang hollow. What if all along she had been stealing from me? Junior year brought clinical rotations that tested every fiber of my being. Long shifts, crying children, families breaking under the weight of illness. Yet I thrived. My professors praised my mix of skill and compassion. Patients clung to my hand the way I once clung to Mom's. David and I grew closer, supporting each other through sleepless nights of study and exams. When he invited me to dinner with his parents, I braced myself for polite disapproval. Instead, I found warmth. His father, a surgeon, raised a glass in toast after hearing about my GPA. "To excellence and compassion," he said, "the world needs more providers like you." I nearly cried into my water glass. To be seen that way, not as a burden, not as a cost, but as someone of worth, was overwhelming. For a while, I believed Sophie had faded from my story. But Sophie was not a woman who faded. The spring of my senior year graduation approached. My cap and gown hung in my closet, the culmination of years of grit and endurance. The Parkers planned a celebration dinner. David's parents ordered me a lab coat embroidered with my name, Maria Hatch, RN. On the morning of the ceremony, I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting my tassel, my mother's pearl earrings glinting against my skin. Jasmine snapped photos, laughing and hugging me. For the first time in years, I felt like I was standing in the light, until I saw them. Sophie, Jack, Cassidy. They walked across campus toward me, dressed as if for a staged photo shoot. Sophie wore her cream suit, Jack trailed beside her with his usual bland expression, and Cassidy's smile curved like a knife. "We wouldn't miss our Maria's big day," Sophie announced, her voice loud enough for nearby families to hear. The way she said "our" made my stomach clench. I forced a polite smile, but unease prickled under my skin. During the ceremony, I could feel Sophie's gaze burning into me. When my name was called, her voice rang out above all others. "That's my niece. I raised her after her mother died." The words twisted like barbed wire. After the ceremony, before I could reach the Parkers, and David Sophie intercepted me. She pressed a thick envelope into my hands. "Your graduation gift," she said sweetly. "Open it now." Confused, I tore it open. Inside wasn't a card or money. It was an invoice neatly typed, itemized, and circled in red ink. Expenses incurred in raising Maria Hatch, 2012 to 2017. Room and board, $31,000. Clothing and personal items, $4,850. School supplies and activities, $3,275. Medical and dental, $5,200. Transportation and miscellaneous, $6,675. Total $50,000. I stared at the page, my vision swimming. "What is this?" I whispered. "A reality check." Sophie replied, her smile never faltering. "Now that you're officially an adult with a career ahead, it's time to repay what you owe. We sacrificed so much to raise you." Uncle Jack shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. Cassidy's smirk deepened. My hands shook. "I don't owe you anything. The government sent you money every month. That was for my care." "Barely enough to cover food," Sophie said smoothly. "This reflects everything else. We expect monthly payments beginning with your first paycheck." Before I could speak, David appeared at my side, his presence grounding me. He glanced at the invoice, then at Sophie, his jaw tightening. "Everything okay here?" "Just a family matter," Sophie replied, her tone dripping with faux warmth. "Maria understands her obligations." But I didn't understand. Not at all. That night, surrounded by the Parkers, Jasmine, and David, I tried to celebrate, but Sophie's invoice burned in my mind. My stomach churned, as if the paper were acid dissolving everything I had built. 3 days later, an official-looking letter arrived at my apartment. A law firm representing Sophie demanded immediate payment of $50,000. Legal action would follow if I didn't comply within 30 days. My hands trembled as I read. Panic surged, threatening to undo me. Sophie had turned my graduation, my freedom, into another set of chains. I called David, my voice breaking. He connected me with his father, who in turn referred me to a family lawyer named Marcus Wright. When I slid the letter across Marcus's desk, he frowned, flipping through it with practiced eyes. "This is unusual," he admitted. "Guardians don't typically sue former wards for basic care expenses, especially when survivor benefits were involved." He looked up at me. "There's something more going on here. Tell me everything." So I did. 2 hours later, Marcus closed his notebook. "I'll take your case," he said firmly, "and I don't think you'll owe your aunt a dime when we're done." For the first time since opening Sophie's envelope, I breathed. But in the back of my mind, one question burned hotter than fear. If Sophie was bold enough to drag me to court, what else was she hiding? Marcus Wright's office was small but steady-framed. Law diplomas lined the wall shelves, filled with neat binders, and the faint scent of old leather clung to the air. He wasn't flashy like Sophie's attorney, but something about his calm eyes made me feel safer than I had in years. "This isn't just unusual," he said, setting Sophie's invoice on his desk. "It's absurd. Guardians have a fiduciary duty to provide care without expecting repayment, especially when government benefits are involved." Fiduciary duty. I repeated the phrase foreign on my tongue. "It means," Marcus explained gently, "she was legally obligated to use any funds she received for your benefit. Not hers, not Cassidy's, yours." The words landed with both relief and rage. For years, Sophie had painted herself as a martyr, sighing about expenses, scolding me for eating too much at dinner, insisting I was draining her resources. Now I saw the cracks. She hadn't just twisted the truth, she might have broken the law. The weeks that followed were a blur of legal preparation. Marcus filed a counterclaim denying Sophie's right to reimbursement. He also submitted requests for Sophie's financial records, bank statements, benefit documents, tax returns. While he worked, I tried to keep my life moving forward. I had started my first nursing job at Children's Memorial Hospital. The days were long, filled with fragile little bodies hooked to machines, worried parents clinging to hope. It was overwhelming, but every time I placed my stethoscope against a child's chest, I thought of Mom. Hope is contagious. But even at work, Sophie haunted me. Letters from her lawyer arrived weekly, full of threats couched in legal jargon. Each envelope felt like a reminder that she hadn't just followed me into adulthood, she was still trying to own it. At night, David sat beside me at the kitchen table, our laptops glowing as we combed through documents Marcus sent. "She's banking on intimidation," he said, pointing to one letter. "She thinks you'll fold." But I wouldn't, not this time. Then came the discovery. Marcus called me into his office one gray afternoon, spreading a folder across the desk like he was about to deal cards. "We got the financials," he said. "And Maria, you need to brace yourself." He slid the first statement toward me. Monthly deposits from the Social Security Administration, $1,235. Every month. For 5 years. "That's more than she told me," I whispered. He nodded grimly. "And that's not all. Here's a life insurance payout, $65,000. And here," he flipped to another page, "inheritance from your maternal grandparents, $15,000. All of it legally required to be used for you." The total burned into my brain, nearly $190,000. I pressed my hand to my mouth, bile rising. While Sophie had dressed Cassidy in new clothes, paid for SAT tutors, and remodeled her bedroom twice, I had been wearing secondhand shoes and paying rent out of my bakery paychecks. "She took everything," I whispered, "everything Mom left me." Marcus's voice was steady. "She didn't just take it. She used it to maintain her lifestyle, all while making you feel guilty for existing." He leaned back, eyes narrowing. "This isn't just unethical. This is potentially criminal." The word echoed, criminal. For so long I had wondered if I was the one in the wrong, ungrateful, demanding a burden. But now with the evidence in black and white, the truth was undeniable. Sophie hadn't sacrificed for me. She had stolen from me. Sophie's response to the counterclaim arrived soon after. Her attorney, Mr. Daniels, painted her as a selfless savior. My client opened her home to a grieving orphan, providing food, shelter, and education at great personal expense, the letter read. "It is only fair that she be compensated now that Miss Hatch is gainfully employed." When Marcus read it aloud, his lips twitched in something between disbelief and disgust. He's playing the sympathy card. Classic. But the documents will shred this narrative in court. Despite his confidence, anxiety gnawed at me. I couldn't sleep. In the darkness, memories replayed like a cruel reel. Sophie's lectures about grocery bills, Cassidy's whispers at school, Jack's silence at the dinner table. Now all of it sharpened into focus. It hadn't been neglect born of financial strain. It had been choice. One night, after tossing in bed for hours, I pulled out Mom's letter again. Remember who you are. You have the strength to weather any storm. I pressed the paper to my chest, letting the words seep into me. This storm wasn't just about money. It was about truth. Meanwhile, cracks began to show in Sophie's household. Uncle Jack called me unexpectedly one evening. His voice was rough, weary. Maria, I want you to know I didn't realize the full extent of what Sophie was doing. I almost laughed bitter. You sat there, Jack. Every night. You heard her make me feel like a bill she couldn't afford, and you did nothing. Silence stretched across the line, heavy and awkward. Finally, he sighed. You're right. My silence made me complicit. I can't undo that. But I'm leaving her. This lawsuit, this person she's become, it's too much. I should have stood up for you years ago. I didn't know what to feel. Anger. Sadness, pity. The only thing I managed was a flat, I hope you find peace, Jack. When I hung up, I realized something. Sophie's mask wasn't just cracking in court. It was cracking at home, too. 2 months after Sophie filed the lawsuit, we received notice of a trial date. Marcus seemed almost pleased. This gives us discovery powers, he explained. We can subpoena records she'd rather keep hidden. David squeezed my hand under the table, his eyes steady. You're not alone in this. But despite their reassurances, fear gnawed at me. Sophie was ruthless. I had learned that the hard way. If she was willing to twist my childhood into a ledger of debts, what else was she willing to do in court? The night before the trial, I couldn't sleep. Memories flooded me. Mom's laughter in our tiny kitchen, her cough echoing in the night. Sophie's voice saying, "We have standards in this neighborhood." I whispered into the darkness as though Mom could hear, "I'm trying to be strong. I hope you'd be proud." The words steadied me, because this time I wasn't walking into Sophie's house powerless and alone. I was walking into a courtroom with evidence, allies, and the truth. And for the first time in my life, Sophie would have to answer for what she had done. The county courthouse loomed ahead like a fortress, its brick facade weathered by decades of human conflict. My heels clicked against the marble floor as I walked in, flanked by David and Jasmine. I clutched my mother's pearl earrings, the same ones I had worn on graduation day, as though they could anchor me. Marcus was already waiting by the courtroom doors, his leather briefcase in hand, his expression calm. "Ready?" he asked. No, I wanted to say, but I nodded anyway. Across the hall, Sophie sat with her attorney, Mr. Daniels. She wore a conservative cream suit, her hair swept into a chignon, her posture regal. Cassidy lounged beside her, smirking at her phone, while Jack sat slumped, eyes fixed on the floor. When Sophie's gaze met mine, her lips curled into a confident smile, the same smile she wore at my mother's funeral when she promised to take care of me. The bailiff called our case Hatch versus Hatch. We rose as Judge Harriet Woodson entered. She was a woman in her 60s with silver-streaked hair and eyes that missed nothing. Her gavel struck once. Let's proceed. Mr. Daniels went first, painting Sophie as a saint. Your Honor. My client took in her orphaned niece without hesitation. For 5 years, she provided food, clothing, education, and stability. This lawsuit seeks only fair reimbursement for extraordinary expenses. $50,000, a modest sum compared to what she sacrificed. He gestured toward Sophie, who had perfected the look of long-suffering generosity. Cassidy dabbed at imaginary tears. Jack remained silent. Marcus rose slowly, his tone measured, but sharp. Your Honor, this case isn't about reimbursement. It's about accountability. Mrs. Hatch was entrusted with substantial funds specifically designated for Maria's care. Instead of using them responsibly, she misappropriated them for her own household. And now she has the audacity to demand even more. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Sophie's smile faltered just slightly. Sophie was the first to testify. On the stand, she told her story with practiced poise. She described sleepless nights, sacrifices made, vacations foregone. She produced the invoice, reading each line with dramatic emphasis: food, clothing, medical expenses. Did the Social Security survivor benefits cover these costs? Mr. Daniels asked. Not even close, Sophie said solemnly. The monthly check barely bought groceries. We paid the rest out of pocket. It nearly bankrupted us. Her voice trembled convincingly. For a moment, I wondered if the judge might believe her. Then Marcus approached. Mrs. Hatch, you were Maria's legal guardian. Correct. Yes. And as such, you had a fiduciary duty to use funds for her benefit. Correct. Yes, of course. Marcus slid a document across the bench. This is a Social Security statement showing monthly deposits of $1 and $235 into your account. Is that correct? Sophie shifted. That seems higher than I remember. Over 5 years, that totals nearly $75,000. Does that refresh your memory? She swallowed. Expenses add up quickly. Marcus didn't flinch. Additionally, you received a life insurance payout of $65,000 and a $15,000 inheritance from Maria's grandparents. That's $155,000 in total, combined with Social Security nearly $190,000. Where did that money go, Mrs. Hatch? Her composure cracked. Household costs increased. We had to move to a larger home to accommodate her. Interesting, Marcus said, flipping to another page. Because your mortgage payments remained the same before and after Maria moved in. So again, where did the money go? Sophie's face flushed. We did our best. Did your best? Marcus leaned in. Maria wore secondhand clothes. She was denied orthodontic care. She paid rent from her part-time job. And now you sue her for another $50,000. Is that your idea of best? Sophie stammered. Daniels objected, but the judge waved him down. Cassidy shifted uncomfortably. Jack rubbed his temples. Then it was my turn. I took the stand, my hands trembling as I swore the oath. The courtroom blurred until I found David's steady gaze in the back row. I inhaled, then spoke. I told them about the rules, the chores, the way Sophie reminded me daily that I was a burden. I described paying rent from bakery paychecks, watching Cassidy receive luxuries while I scraped by. I recounted the moment I found the Social Security statements, how my stomach dropped as I realized the truth. I didn't cry, not once. I spoke clearly, steadily, letting facts carry more weight than tears. Mr. Daniels tried to rattle me on cross-examination. Wasn't it generous of the Hatch to take you in rather than send you to foster care? I looked him in the eye. Generosity doesn't look like theft. Generosity doesn't come with invoices. For the first time, Sophie flinched. When testimony ended, Judge Woodson leaned forward. Her voice was sharp enough to slice through stone. Mrs. Hatch, the evidence is clear. You received nearly $190,000 in funds designated for Maria's care. Instead of preserving those funds, you used them for your own household while treating Maria as a financial burden. Now you sue her for additional expenses, many of which appear fabricated. She shuffled the invoice, disdain curling her lip. Braces. She never received them. Sports equipment. She was never enrolled. This is not a bill, Mrs. Hatch. This is fraud disguised as sacrifice. The courtroom gasped. Sophie's face drained of color. Cassidy looked like she wanted to disappear. Jack stared at the floor. I hereby dismiss this case with prejudice, the judge declared. Furthermore, I am referring it to the district attorney's office for investigation into potential misuse of Social Security benefits and breach of fiduciary duty. The gavel struck. The sound echoed like thunder. It was over. As the courtroom emptied, Sophie remained frozen by the bench, her mask shattered. Daniels whispered urgently in her ear, but she didn't move. Jack lingered behind her, his shoulders slumped. Cassidy clutched her phone like a lifeline. I walked past them without a word. For years, Sophie had forced me to feel like a debtor. Now she was the one who owed answers. Outside, the sunlight was blinding. David slipped his arm around my shoulders. Jasmine threw her arms around me. Marcus smiled. Congratulations, Maria. That couldn't have gone better. I nodded, tears finally spilling down my cheeks, not of grief this time, but of release. For the first time since Mom's death, I felt free. Not because Sophie lost, but because the truth had finally been spoken out loud. The days after the trial passed in a blur. Relief, anger, sadness, all of it swirled together, leaving me exhausted. The courtroom had given me vindication, but it hadn't erased the scars Sophie left. David drove me home that evening. Neither of us spoke much. The silence was companionable, full of unspoken understanding. When we pulled into my apartment lot, he reached over, squeezed my hand, and said, "It's over now. She can't hurt you anymore." But even as I nodded, I wasn't sure. Sophie's text arrived 2 days later. "This isn't over. Family doesn't treat family this way." I stared at it, bitterness rising. Family doesn't steal from you, doesn't humiliate you, doesn't drag you into court with fabricated invoices. I deleted the message without replying. For the first time, I felt no guilt in doing so. Uncle Jack called a week later. His voice was rough, weary. Maria, I know I don't deserve your time, but I wanted to say I'm sorry. You let her treat me like a burden, I said quietly. Every day for 5 years, and you stood by. He exhaled heavily. You're right. My silence was cowardice. Sophie controlled everything in our home, and I let her. But I need you to know I've left her. We're separating. The trial made me see who she really is, and who I've become by letting it happen. There was a pause. I searched for anger, for triumph, but what I found was only sadness. I hope you find peace, Jack. That's all I can say. It was the last conversation we ever had. News spread quickly in Sophie's circle. The DA chose not to press criminal charges, but Sophie was ordered to complete financial management courses and community service. Neighbors whispered about misused funds, and the facade she'd so carefully built began to crumble. Cassidy, of course, lashed out online. Social media posts about me being ungrateful, comments dripping with venom. I blocked her. It was like flipping a switch. Suddenly her words couldn't reach me. Meanwhile, I focused on work. Children's Memorial Hospital became my sanctuary. The pediatric unit was full of tiny fighters whose courage humbled me daily. Their families looked at me with gratitude I had never known in Sophie's house. My supervisor pulled me aside one afternoon. You have a gift, Maria. The children trust you. Some nurses take years to build that kind of rapport. I didn't tell her why. That my childhood had been one long lesson in noticing pain no one else wanted to see. 6 months later, on Mom's birthday, I visited her grave for the first time in years. The cemetery was quiet autumn leaves painting the ground in gold. I laid fresh flowers down and sat cross-legged on the grass. I survived, Mom, I whispered. My voice cracked. Not just survived, I thrived. I have a job you would be proud of. I have people who love me for me. And Sophie can't hurt me anymore. Tears slipped down my cheeks, but they weren't bitter. They were cleansing a release. For the first time since I was 13, I felt like I was speaking to her not as a broken child, but as the woman she had raised me to be. Life kept moving forward. David and I married in a small ceremony surrounded by the Parkers, Jasmine, Mrs. Garcia from the bakery, and Mrs. Jackson, the people who had become my chosen family. As I walked down the aisle, I wore Mom's pearl earrings and carried her nursing pins sewn into my bouquet. It felt like she was there watching. The Hoffmans. David's parents welcomed me fully as their daughter-in-law. Over dinner one night, Dr. Hoffman raised his glass and said, "You've built yourself from ashes, Maria. That's the kind of strength no degree can measure." I smiled, tears blurring the crystal rim of my own glass. A year after the trial, an email arrived from the hospital's HR department. A new scholarship fund had been established in my mother's name for nursing students from single-parent households. $50,000 had seeded the trust. Attached was a note from legal. The donation had come from an anonymous source. But the number 50,000 was too exact to be coincidence. Later I learned the truth. It was Jack. He hadn't reached out again, but in his own way, he tried to make amends. Not to me directly, but to the next generation of students like me. At first, I wasn't sure how to feel. Did it erase the years of silence? No. But Mrs. Jackson, ever wise, reminded me, redemption doesn't erase wrongs, but it can plant something good where pain once grew. Don't let Sophie steal that from you, too. So I accepted. I even served on the committee that selected the scholarship recipients. Each student I met reminded me of myself, hungry for opportunity, carrying invisible weights. Helping them felt like honoring Mom's legacy more than anything Sophie ever pretended to do. Therapy helped me untangle the knots Sophie left behind. My therapist, Dr. Lynn, once told me, the hardest part of healing is accepting that some people who should have loved you simply couldn't. Their failure isn't your reflection. For years, I had internalized Sophie's words, that I was too costly, too needy, too much. Now I knew better. I wasn't too much. I was enough, always had been. Sometimes late at night, I still dreamed of Sophie. Her voice sharp, her rules endless, her smile fixed like porcelain. In those dreams, I was still a teenager scrubbing her floors, counting the hours until freedom. But then I would wake to David's steady breathing beside me, the hum of city lights beyond our window, and the soft weight of peace settling back into my chest. Because Sophie had taken my childhood, but she hadn't taken my future. Now, years later, as I sit in the break room between shifts, I think about what family really means. Family isn't blood or obligation. It isn't invoices disguised as love. Family is Mrs. Jackson, who believed in me when no one else did. It's Mrs. Garcia slipping pastries into my bag. It's Jasmine sharing her parents and their kindness without hesitation. It's David who holds me steady when storms rise. True family is chosen, built, nurtured. Mom knew that, and now so do I. If you're listening to this, maybe you've been where I was treated like a burden instead of a blessing. Please know this, their failure doesn't define you. You are worthy of love, of safety, of joy. Sometimes we have to create the family we deserve, and that more than any courtroom victory is what set me free.